Veronica Sterling's world was one of controlled, vertical lines. From the 40th floor of the Sterling Capitol Tower, the city below was a silent, geometric grid. Her office was an exercise in expensive minimalism, a vast desk of polished obsidian, two severe leather chairs she rarely invited anyone to use, and a single, dramatic orchid whose calculated imperfection was its most costly feature. The air itself seemed filtered of all extraneous sound, leaving only the whisper of the ventilation system and the quiet, rhythmic click of her pen against a portfolio. She did not look at the city. She looked at numbers, at liabilities and assets, at the cold, hard grammar of acquisition and liquidation. Today's subject was a dusty, forgotten entity called Gregoire & Phil's Automata, a small company her firm had acquired as a minor component of a much larger real estate portfolio. The property itself is prime for redevelopment, she said, her voice a low, confident monotone that gave no quarter. She did not raise her eyes from the spreadsheet projected onto the glass wall before her. Demolition permits are approved. The value is in the land, obviously. Across the obsidian desk, her junior analyst, David Chen, shifted uncomfortably. He was young, ambitious, and perpetually intimidated by the sheer, frictionless force of her will. He held a tablet displaying photographs of the Gregoire workshop interior, dusty benches, racks of brass rods, wooden cabinets with countless tiny drawers, and hulking shapes shrouded in gray, canvas tarps. To him, it looked like a cluttered, forgotten museum. And the contents? David asked, his voice softer than he intended. The preliminary inventory lists several tons of specialty tools, parts, and what they call unfinished movements. Veronica finally looked up, her gaze sharp and impatient, as if he had just asked an exceptionally stupid question. Contents. Mr. Chen, you are looking at scrap. Specialized scrap, perhaps, but scrap nonetheless. It's a liability. We have a quote for disposal. $18,000 to have it all hauled to a specialty recycler. An annoyance, but a necessary cost to clear the site. She made a small, dismissive gesture with her hand, a flick of the wrist that consigned a century of craftsmanship to the category of refuse. Find a cheaper way to do it, if you can. I want that building empty by the end of the month. The bulldozers are scheduled. David swallowed. He had spent an hour looking through the digital files on Gregoire & Phil's. He had read about its founder, a reclusive genius named Julien Gregoire, who had crafted mechanical marvels for royalty and collectors a generation ago. There were notes, in a file within a file, about a final, legendary project, the Celestial Cartographer, that was rumored to be his unfinished magnum opus. He had felt a small, academic thrill reading about it. Some of the horology forums suggest the Gregoire name still has some cachet with collectors, he ventured, instantly regretting it. Veronica's lips formed a thin, pitying smile. Forums. Mr. Chen, we do not make nine-figure deals based on the nostalgic chatter of hobbyists in their basements. We deal in tangible assets. Land. Square footage. Market rate leases. We are not in the business of sentiment. Get rid of it. The finality in her tone was absolute. The conversation was over. She had already moved on, her eyes back on the glowing spreadsheet, her mind calculating the profit margins of the sleek glass condominium that would soon stand where the dusty workshop now sat. David nodded silently, gathered his tablet, and retreated from the cold, quiet office, the weight of his task feeling less like a corporate directive and more like an act of cultural vandalism. 30 miles away, in a world defined by the scent of mineral oil and aged wood, Elias Thorne worked in a silence of a different kind. His silence was not empty, it was full of purpose, of focus. His small workshop, converted from the garage of his modest suburban home, was the antithesis of Veronica Sterling's office. Every surface was covered with tools, but they were not cluttered. They were arranged with a watchmaker's precision, tiny screwdrivers in ordered racks, calipers and lathes gleaming under the focused beam of an articulated lamp, trays of sorted gears and springs laid out like a surgeon's instruments. Here, the only vertical lines were the steady, descending weights of the grandfather clock he was currently restoring. His hands, though calloused, moved with an impossible delicacy. He was repivoting a balance wheel, a task requiring microscopic precision. His breath was steady, his focus absolute. He did not hear his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, enter the workshop. He only sensed her presence, a slight shift in the air beside him. He finished the delicate maneuver, set the tool down with a soft click, and then turned to her, his expression softening. "Is it done?" Lily asked. She was a serious child, with her father's quiet eyes and observant nature. She never bounded into the workshop, she entered with a respect for the work being done there. "Almost," Elias said, his voice quiet but warm. He pointed with a pair of brass tweezers to the mechanism. "This little wheel is the heart. It was beating too fast. I'm giving it a new place to rest, so it can beat correctly." Lily peered at the intricate maze of brass and steel. She did not see a machine, she saw the world her father inhabited, a world of patience and care. She saw how he could spend an entire day making one tiny part work perfectly again. "Is its heart broken?" Elias considered this. "It was," he said. "But it's not anymore." He looked around the small, orderly space. This was the life he had chosen. It was a life of small repairs, of bringing broken things back to a state of quiet function. It was a world away from the one he had left behind, a world of pressure and prestige, of deadlines and legendary price tags. And every evening, when he closed the workshop door and went inside to make dinner for his daughter, he knew he had made the right choice. The phone call came later that evening, after Lily was asleep. The caller ID showed a Swiss number, a familiar name, Marcus Bell. "Elias," Marcus's voice boomed, full of the energy and confidence that came from brokering deals worth more than most people's homes. "I have something for you. The Althani collection. They need someone to oversee the restoration of the Duc d'Orléans Breguet. They're asking for you specifically." Elias leaned against the kitchen counter, looking out at the quiet, dark backyard. The Duc d'Orléans Breguet. He knew the piece. A symphony of complications, a universe in a pocket watch case. 10 years ago, the offer would have been the pinnacle of his career. "I'm not in that world anymore, Marcus. You know that." "That world is still in you," Marcus insisted. "You were the best at the Maison, Elias. The absolute best. They called you the ghost because you could fix things no one else could even understand, and then you'd just disappear back to your bench. You're living on local clock repairs and service calls. You have patents in your name that major firms are still paying royalties on. Don't tell me you're happy fixing cuckoo clocks." The accusation, meant to sting, held no power. "I am," Elias said simply. There was no defensiveness in his voice, only a statement of fact. He looked at the crayon drawing taped to the refrigerator, a wobbly portrait of him and Lily holding hands. That was his world now. "It was Anna," Marcus said, his voice softening with understanding. He had been Elias's friend through it all. He had seen him at the height of his powers at the legendary Swiss firm, and he had been there for the funeral. "I know. But Lily is growing up. This life, it's safe, but it's small. Your talent is too big to stay in that garage." "It's big enough for us," Elias replied. There was a pause. Elias knew Marcus would not give up easily. "All right," Marcus sighed. "Forget the Breguet. Something else crossed my desk. More of a tragedy, really. Do you remember Gregoire and Phil's?" Elias straightened up. The name resonated deep within him. Julien Gregoire had been a legend, a solitary genius who pushed the boundaries of mechanical art. He was one of the reasons Elias had been drawn to the craft in the first place. Of course. He passed away years ago. The firm went dormant. "Worse," Marcus said, his voice laced with disgust. "It was just acquired by some soulless American private equity firm. Sterling Capital. They bought the block it sits on. They're tearing it down. They're liquidating everything inside. The workshop, the tools, the archives, everything." Elias felt a genuine pang of loss. That workshop was hallowed ground. What's in there? Who knows? The man was a recluse for the last decade of his life. The inventory is vague. Miscellaneous parts and equipment, but Elias, this was Gregoire. There could be anything in there. Schematics. Prototypes. Maybe even. The cartographer, Elias finished, his voice barely a whisper. The celestial cartographer was Gregoire's myth, a rumored automaton of impossible complexity that could map the stars. Most believed it was just a legend. Probably not, Marcus admitted. But even so. To see it all sold for scrap, it's a crime. The liquidation is being handled by some junior analyst. They have a viewing day for scrap haulers tomorrow. Elias was silent for a long moment. He was not a man of impulse. He was a man of careful, deliberate action. But the thought of Julien Gregoire's life's work being shoveled into a recycling dumpster stirred something in him. "Send me the address," he said. The next day, Elias drove his old but immaculately maintained pickup truck into the city. The Gregoire and Phil's building was a modest, 4-story brick structure, sandwiched between a glass-walled bank and a modern coffee shop. It looked like a relic from another time, which, Elias reflected, it was. He was dressed in his usual work attire, sturdy boots, clean denim, and a thick flannel shirt. He looked like what he was pretending to be, a man who hauled scrap. Inside, he met David Chen. The young analyst looked stressed and out of his depth. A few other men, genuine scrap dealers in stained overalls, were poking at piles of metal shavings and old machine housings near the entrance. David held a clipboard and seemed eager to get the process over with. "You're here for the viewing?" David asked. "The main lots are over there. Mostly brass and steel filings, some old industrial shelving." "I was told I could look at the entire contents," Elias said quietly. "For a bulk clearance bid." David seemed surprised. "The whole workshop?" "It's a lot. And most of it is specialized equipment. Not much value in scrap weight. I'd still like to see it." Sighing, David led him past the main floor and up a creaking wooden staircase to the second floor, which housed Julien Gregoire's personal workshop. The moment Elias stepped inside, the air changed. It was thick with the dust of decades, but beneath it was the familiar, comforting scent of oil, brass, and old paper. Sunlight streamed through tall, grimy windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny stars. To David, it was chaos. Benches were littered with half-finished mechanisms. Walls were lined with cabinets, their tiny drawers labeled with elegant, faded calligraphy. And in the center of the room stood several large objects, completely hidden under heavy, gray tarps. But Elias saw something else. He saw order. He saw a mind at work. His eyes, trained by decades of study, scanned the room not as a collection of objects, but as a language. He recognized the distinct pattern of a Rose engine lathe tucked in a corner, half buried under boxes. He saw a complete set of antique staking tools, each one worth a small fortune to the right buyer. He saw stacks of schematics, hand-drawn on vellum, their edges yellowed with age. This was not junk. This was a king's tomb. He walked slowly through the space, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. He did not touch anything. He simply looked, his mind cataloging, assessing, understanding. He saw a rack containing bars of a specific, rare alloy used for temperature-compensating balance springs. He saw a box of uncut synthetic rubies for making jewel bearings. He saw the accumulated life's work of a master. As he passed a cluttered desk near the back wall, something on the floor caught his eye. It was a sleek, black leather portfolio, embossed with the name David Chen. The analyst must have dropped it when he came through earlier. Elias bent down, picked it up, and walked back to the staircase where David was impatiently checking his watch. He held out the portfolio. "I believe this is yours." David's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and relief. "Oh. Thank you. I didn't even realize it was gone." He took it, fumbling with the clasp. "My whole life is in here." He looked at the quiet man in the flannel shirt, a man he had mentally categorized as a simple junk hauler. There was an integrity in his stillness, a sense of calm that was unnerving. "Thank you, really," David said again, feeling a strange need to explain himself. "My boss, Mr. Sterling, she would have my head if I lost this. She's particular." "It's Veronica Sterling, isn't it?" Elias asked, his tone neutral. "Yes. You've heard of her." "I've heard of the firm," Elias said. He decided, in that moment, how he would proceed. He would not play the game of bidding and valuation. He would use their ignorance as his only tool. "I can clear this entire floor for you. Everything. Tools, benches, parts, cabinets. Take it all off your hands." David's interest was piqued. This would save him the headache of coordinating multiple haulers. "What's your bid?" "I won't bid," Elias said calmly. You have a disposal problem. It's going to cost you, what, $10,000 to have this floor cleared by a specialty firm. He was guessing, but he knew the logistics were complex. David's silence confirmed he was close. The actual quote had been $12,000 for this floor alone. I'll solve your problem, Elias continued. I'll take it all. I will sign a contract stating that I am responsible for the complete removal of every item on this floor. In exchange, you pay me nothing, and I pay you a nominal fee for the contents themselves. $1,000. David stared at him. The man was offering to do $12,000 worth of work and pay them for the privilege. From a purely financial perspective, it was an incredible deal for Sterling Capital. It turned a $12,000 liability into a $1,000 asset. A $13,000 swing. Veronica would be thrilled. It was absurd. This man clearly had no idea what he was looking at and just saw a workshop full of interesting trinkets he could maybe sell at a flea market. His boss's condescending voice echoed in his head, hobbyists in their basements, this must be one of them. I need to clear that with my boss, David stammered. He pulled out his phone. Can you wait here for a moment? Elias simply nodded. David walked to the far end of the room, his voice a low murmur. Elias could hear the tinny, impatient squawk of Veronica's voice through the phone's earpiece. David was explaining the offer. There was a pause, and then Elias heard a sound that chilled him more than any shout, a short, sharp bark of laughter from the phone. David came back, his face a mask of corporate neutrality. She agrees, he said. She called it a stupidity tax on your part. Her words, not mine, he added quickly, feeling a sudden, inexplicable need to distance himself from his employer's cruelty. We can draw up the contract this afternoon. $1,000, and you take possession of everything on this floor. You'll have until the end of the month to clear it out. That is acceptable, Elias said, his face betraying no emotion. The deal was done. He had just purchased a king's ransom for the price of a used lawnmower. The moment the ink was dry on the contract and the keys to the workshop were in his hand, Elias made one call. To Marcus. I need you to wire me $1,000, Elias said. And then I need you to come to the city. There's something you have to see. When Marcus arrived at the workshop 2 hours later, he found Elias standing in the center of the room, a small crowbar in his hand. He hadn't touched anything else. He had simply waited, standing beside the largest of the tarp-covered shapes. Did you get it? Marcus asked, his eyes wide as he took in the scale of the collection. Elias, my God. What is all this? I got it, Elias said. He handed Marcus the crowbar. They thought it was trash. They were happy to be rid of it, he gestured to the large, shrouded object. Help me with this. Together, they worked the heavy, stiff canvas off the hulking frame beneath. The cloth was heavy with the dust of years. As it fell away, it revealed not a machine, but the skeleton of a masterpiece. It was a breathtakingly complex assembly of brass, steel, and silver, an orrery of gears and levers and rods that spiraled upwards in a delicate, multi-tiered structure. At its base was a globe of the earth, crafted from lapis lazuli, and above it, a celestial sphere of interlocking silver rings. Even in its unfinished, skeletal state, its purpose was clear. It was a three-dimensional map of the heavens. Marcus stared, speechless. He reached out a hand but stopped himself before he touched it. No, he whispered. It can't be. Is that? The celestial cartographer, Elias confirmed, his voice filled with a reverence that bordered on awe. He was building it. It's all here. The frame, the main gear trains, the escapements. He ran a hand gently over a thick, leather-bound ledger on a nearby bench. And these are the schematics. Every calculation. Every gear ratio. It's all here. Marcus slowly circled the automaton, his mind, accustomed to calculating the value of beautiful objects, struggling to comprehend the scale of what he was seeing. If this is completed. Elias, if this can be made to work as he designed it, there is no price. Museums will go to war over this. This isn't just a machine. It's the defining work of a generation. What did you pay for all this? Elias looked at his friend, a faint, rare smile touching his lips. $1,000. The first step was not work, but archaeology. For a week, Elias did nothing but clean. He worked with the patience of a monk, slowly, methodically, bringing order to the creative chaos Gregoire had left behind. He catalogued every tool, every box of parts, every schematic. He discovered treasures in every corner, a set of tourbillon cages, never used, a series of exquisite, hand-painted enamel dials for watches that were never built, a small, finished automaton of a magpie that would steal a small ring from a velvet pad and hide it in a box, a piece worth tens of thousands of dollars on its own. He set it aside. It would provide the seed money for the real work. But he knew he could not do it alone. The cartographer required more than just horological skill. It needed a master woodcarver for the intricate planetary bodies and the final casework. It needed a metallurgist who understood arcane finishing techniques like black polishing and anglage. He knew exactly who to call. He found two names in an old Gregoire and Phil's employee ledger: Albert Dubois, a cabinet maker, and Samuel Finch, a metal finisher. Both had been laid off a decade earlier when the firm first began to struggle. Both were now in their 70s, long retired. He found Albert in a small woodworking shop behind his house, smelling of sawdust and varnish. He found Samuel tending his garden, his hands, once steady enough to polish microscopic screw heads, now caked with soil. He did not offer them a job. He offered them a chance to finish a legacy. He showed them photos of the cartographer on his phone. Albert stared at the image, his old eyes lighting up. The master's folly, he breathed. He worked on it in secret for years. We all thought it was just a rumor. Samuel looked at Elias, then at the photograph, then back at Elias. You think you can make it work? I know I can, Elias said. But not without you. It needs to be finished the way he would have finished it. They did not ask about salary. They did not ask about hours. They simply asked, when do we start? The workshop, once silent and dusty, came alive with the quiet sounds of creation. The three men worked in a state of shared, unspoken understanding. There was the soft rasp of Albert's files against a piece of rare snakewood that would become the planet Jupiter. There was the rhythmic scrape of Samuel's burnishing tool as he applied a mirror finish to a steel lever no thicker than a needle. And there was the steady, focused presence of Elias, who sat at the main bench, the cartographer's intricate brain spread out before him. He was the conductor, orchestrating the resurrection. He studied Gregoire's notes, deciphering the spidery script, reverse engineering the brilliant, unconventional solutions the master had devised. He found challenges at every turn. A crucial gear train was missing a single, complex component. Using the schematics and his own deep understanding of mechanical theory, Elias spent 3 weeks fabricating the part from scratch on the antique lathe, a part so complex no modern CNC machine could have replicated its subtle, hand-finished properties. Lily became a quiet fixture in the workshop after school. She would do her homework at a small desk Elias had set up for her in a clean corner, the quiet hum of the work a comforting backdrop. She would watch as Albert coaxed a perfect sphere from a block of wood, or as Samuel made a dull piece of metal shine like a black mirror. She saw the joy in their faces, the deep satisfaction of men engaged in work that mattered to them. She brought them glasses of water and asked them serious, thoughtful questions about their craft. They, in turn, treated her with a gentle, grandfatherly affection. The workshop was no longer just a place of work, it was a sanctuary, a community. Instead of starting with the monumental task of the cartographer's main movement, Elias chose a smaller, more manageable project to fund their work. Among Gregoire's unfinished pieces was a singing bird box of remarkable complexity. It was designed with 2 birds, not one, that would rise from the box, turn to each other, and sing a harmonized duet before retreating. The mechanism was a nightmare of miniature bellows, cams, and levers. It had been assembled but never tuned. For a month, Elias worked on the bird box. He disassembled it completely, cleaned and polished every component, and then began the painstaking process of reassembly and tuning. It was work that existed at the very edge of human perception, adjusting the tension on a microscopic spring to alter the pitch of a whistle by a fraction of a tone. Finally, it was done. He wound the small key, slid the activation lever, and the workshop filled with the purest, most lifelike birdsong imaginable. The 2 tiny, iridescent feathered birds popped up, nodded to each other, and performed their perfect, mechanical duet. Marcus arranged the sale. He knew a single, perfect client, a Japanese technology billionaire named Kaito Tanaka, a man who had made his fortune in the digital world but whose passion was for the beautiful, intricate machinery of the analog age. He was a notoriously private collector. Marcus didn't send photos. He sent a single, handwritten letter describing the piece and its provenance. Tanaka flew to the city on his private jet. The meeting did not take place in a boardroom or an auction house, but in the workshop itself. Tanaka, an immaculate man in a simple dark suit, walked into the space and stood for a long moment, simply taking in the atmosphere of quiet, focused work. Albert and Samuel nodded to him respectfully and continued their tasks. Elias, wiping his hands on a clean cloth, brought the bird box to a clear workbench. He did not give a sales pitch. He simply wound it and played it. Tanaka watched, his face impassive. The birds sang their song. When it was over, a profound silence filled the room. The billionaire leaned closer, examining the exquisite detail of the feathered birds, the flawless engine turning on the silver case. He looked up at Elias. "Gregoire's ghost is in this machine," Tanaka said, his voice soft with reverence. He then turned to Marcus. "My assistant will arrange the transfer. $750,000. Is this acceptable?" Marcus, ever the cool-headed broker, simply nodded, while internally his mind was reeling. Elias remained calm. He gave a slight, respectful bow of his head. "It is." The money was not for him. It was for the work. It bought them time. It bought them the finest materials. It bought them the freedom to complete the cartographer not quickly, but perfectly. The sale was conducted with absolute discretion. No press releases, no auction records. But in the rarefied air of world-class collecting, a whisper began to circulate: something extraordinary was happening in the old Gregoire workshop. The whisper eventually found its way to an online forum, a private message board for horological obsessives where David Chen, now unemployed and disillusioned, still spent his evenings. A user from Geneva posted a cryptic message, heard from a source that a previously unknown Gregoire double-singing bird just sold privately. Said to be a masterpiece. Anyone have details? David felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He remembered seeing that exact description, double-singing bird, unfinished, on the inventory list he had prepared for Veronica. The list he had told her about. The list she had dismissed as irrelevant. He went back through the files on his personal laptop, his heart pounding. He found the photos he had taken of the workshop's contents. He zoomed in on a blurry shot of a cluttered bench. There it was. A small, ornate silver box, half-assembled, with two tiny, feathered shapes beside it. He spent the next hour frantically searching, cross-referencing, connecting the dots. The quiet man in the flannel shirt. The insulting $1,000 offer. The contract that signed away not just scrap metal, but the entire artistic estate of a genius. He felt a wave of nausea. He had not just been an accessory to a bad business deal, he had been the willing instrument of an act of historic ignorance. He calculated the swing. A $750,000 sale from an asset that had been valued at negative $18,000. A difference of $768,000. And that was just for one, small piece. What else was in that workshop? The thought of the large, tarp-covered shapes in the middle of the room made his blood run cold. He knew he had to tell her. Not out of loyalty, but out of a perverse sense of professional duty. It was a mistake of such magnitude that it could not remain hidden. Veronica Sterling did not take the news well. When David, having secured a meeting under a vague pretense, laid out the evidence in her sterile, 40th floor office, her reaction was not one of reflection or analysis. It was one of pure, undiluted fury. Her face, usually a mask of controlled composure, became a tight, bloodless knot of rage. $750,000, she hissed, the words precise and venomous. For a music box. That is impossible. It's been verified through a contact I have at a Swiss auction house, David said, standing his ground for the first time in his career. And Veronica, that wasn't the important piece. There were other things in there. Much larger things. The notes on the firm mentioned a final project. The cartographer, she spat the word like it was a personal insult. The hobbyist fantasy you mentioned. You are telling me that you allowed a priceless collection of artifacts to be sold for $1,000 to some scrap hauler. I followed your orders, David said, his voice steady. Your exact words were, get rid of the scrap. You laughed at him. You called it a stupidity tax. The decision was yours. The truth of his words was irrelevant to her. In her world, blame was not a matter of fact, but a commodity to be assigned downwards. She saw only his failure to protect her from her own arrogance. You were the analyst on the ground, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. You were responsible for due diligence. You failed. Spectacularly. Clear out your desk. You are finished. David felt a strange sense of liberation. He had expected it. He simply nodded, turned, and walked out of the Obsidian office for the last time, leaving Veronica Sterling alone with the colossal, unraveling reality of her mistake. For the next hour, she did not move. She stared out at the city grid, but she did not see it. She saw her own reflection in the glass, and for the first time, it looked back at her with the unfamiliar expression of a fool. Her rage eventually cooled and recrystallized into a harder, more dangerous substance, resolve. She would not let this stand. She was Veronica Sterling. People did not get the better of her. There had to be a loophole, a contractual error, a way to reclaim what was hers. She would go there herself. She would deal with this quiet, clever little man and put him back in his place. She drove her black German sedan to the workshop herself, a breach of protocol so severe it was almost unthinkable. She never visited sites. She had people for that. But this was personal. She parked the immaculate car in front of the old brick building. It looked different. The windows were clean. A warm, yellow light glowed from within. She could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of careful work. She pushed open the door and walked in. The air was clean, the floors swept. The three men at their benches looked up, their concentration broken by her sharp, intrusive presence. Elias, at the center bench, turned slowly. Before him stood the cartographer, now stripped of its dust and grime, its intricate skeleton gleaming under the work lights. It was far larger and more complex than she had imagined. It was terrifyingly beautiful. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. She walked towards him, her expensive heels clicking on the clean-swept wooden floor. She stopped on the other side of the workbench, using it as a barrier, a negotiating table. We need to talk. Elias looked at her. His expression was calm, patient. He was not surprised to see her. He had been expecting this. He simply waited. There has been a significant misunderstanding regarding our transaction, she began, adopting the smooth, commanding tone she used in boardrooms. A gross misrepresentation of the value of the assets involved. The contract was signed under false pretenses. The contract was signed under the pretense that you believed the contents of this workshop to be worthless scrap, Elias corrected her, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight of authority. You were not mistaken about my intentions. You were mistaken about the value of what you owned. There is a difference. Her eyes narrowed. He was not intimidated. He was not flustered. He was simply stating a fact. She changed tactics. Look. You've had your little victory. You made a clever deal. I can appreciate that. She forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. Clearly, what you are doing here requires capital. Resources. A global distribution network. Things I can provide. I am prepared to offer you a partnership. We will form a new venture. Sterling Gridwire. We will fund the completion of this project and split the profits. 50-50. Albert and Samuel had stopped their work entirely now, watching the exchange. Elias looked from Veronica's taut, predatory face to the magnificent, half-finished machine between them. He thought of the quiet, collaborative peace of the last few months. He thought of Lily doing her homework in the corner. He thought of the respect for the work itself, a respect Veronica could never comprehend. He did not need her money. He did not need her network. And he certainly did not need her partnership. No, he said. It was not an aggressive refusal. It was a simple, definitive statement of reality. A closed door. No, she repeated, incredulous. I am offering you a 50% stake in a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Do not be a fool. Our business was concluded when your analyst accepted my payment of $1,000, Elias said, his gaze unwavering. This is my workshop now. These are my tools. And this is my work. We have nothing further to discuss. He then turned his back to her, a gesture of dismissal more profound than any insult, and picked up a tiny, intricate tool. He bent his head, his focus returning entirely to the mechanism before him, leaving her standing alone in a world she could not enter and did not understand. Veronica Sterling stood there for a full minute, her hands clenched into fists. She had been rendered irrelevant. Her power, her money, her influence, they were meaningless here. She turned and stormed out of the workshop, the sharp slam of the door the only evidence of her fury. 6 months later, the celestial cartographer was finished. It was unveiled not at a trade show, but at a private exhibition for a curated audience of museum curators, academics, and the world's most elite collectors. It was a masterpiece that transcended craftsmanship and became true art. Standing over 10 feet tall, it was a clockwork solar system. At the turn of a single, massive key, the entire mechanism whirred to silent, fluid life. The lapis lazuli Earth rotated on its axis. The silver moon orbited the Earth, perfectly displaying its phases. The wooden planets, each a work of art in its own right, traced their elliptical orbits around a central, golden sun. But its true genius was revealed when a set of levers was engaged. A portion of the celestial sphere would open, and a miniature, articulated arm, the cartographer, would emerge, dip a tiny silver quill into an inkwell, and begin to draw a perfect, impossibly detailed star chart onto a disk of vellum, its position corresponding to the exact date and time. It was magic, wrought from brass and steel. The world of art and engineering was stunned. It was hailed as the eighth wonder of the mechanical world. Elias Thorne, the quiet man who had resurrected it, became a legend overnight. But he gave no interviews. He posed for no photographs. The work spoke for itself. He and his 2 partners established a new firm, simply named Thorne and Gregoire. They were inundated with commissions from clients who were willing to wait years and pay fortunes for a piece of their genius. Veronica Sterling's firm suffered. The story of the Gregoire liquidation became a cautionary tale whispered in financial circles, a case study in the fatal consequences of hubris and a lack of vision. The catastrophic failure of due diligence cost her investors, and her reputation for infallible judgment was shattered. The sleek glass condominium was eventually built, but it stood as a monument to her greatest failure. Elias did not move his operation. He did not build a modern facility. He had a simple, hand-carved sign made by Albert Du Bois and hung it over the door of the old brick building, Thorne and Gregoire. Automata and horology. The sign was understated, elegant, and permanent. He bought the building itself, securing the legacy of the space for a new generation. One evening, long after the fame and the flood of success had become a new kind of normal, Elias sat at his personal workbench in the quiet of his home. The workshop was closed for the night. Lily was asleep upstairs. The fortune he had earned sat in a bank account, largely untouched. In his hands was not $1 million automaton, but a small, cheap plastic music box. It belonged to Lily. The tune it played, a simple lullaby, had begun to stutter and warp. He opened the small plastic casing with the same care he had given the cartographer. He diagnosed the problem, a bent tooth on the tiny metal comb. With a pair of delicate pliers and a watchmaker's eyeglass, he carefully, patiently, bent the minuscule piece of metal back into its perfect alignment. He closed the case, wound the key, and the clear, simple notes of the lullaby filled the quiet room, perfect once more. He placed the music box on the table, ready to be returned to his daughter's nightstand. He was unchanged. His success had not altered his core. He was a restorer of broken things, a quiet master in a quiet room, a father who had built a world for his daughter, one perfectly calibrated gear at a time.